Hey there, just wanted to go over this base and her construction. Since it's a little bit different than most fursuits you see, she's actually made of a Fosshape and wire and epoxy base, only in very small spots. So she's actually super lightweight. Instead of a normal epoxy or resin head, there's only epoxy here, which I'll show you on some that I have started that aren't furred up. For example, I have Fosshape before it's been heat treated. It's got some fluff on it. This stuff picks up a lot of fluff because it's pretty much felt or a fleece, and then you heat steam it and it turns into this, more of a hardened felt, kind of squishy, but it holds its shape, but it bounces back. And then from there, that's obviously not enough to hold up if it gets squished, or it could just get warped and floppy and kind of weird. So we take it from there, and after drawing out the expression I want and cutting it how I want, I go over all the edges with wire that is then sewn in place. And it has to be galvanized steel wire. That's what's strong enough and won't rust, which is very important since this is going to be obviously worn on your face. Although I further seal it to protect it from that with first Fabri-tac, which is only dissolved with acetone, which you're obviously not going to be washing your fursuit with. Don't wash your fursuit with acetone. That will do terrible things to all kinds of stuff. But you just go along the edge. And the reason I do that first is because, I forgot to grab it. I use EVA Foam clay, which is this really neat, fun stuff to work with. Oh my gosh, I'm doing this all one-handed, so forgive my video quality, but it kind of feels like sculpting with a marshmallow paste. Really pleasant to work with, really quick to work with too. This stuff dries extremely fast, so you got to keep the lid on. So then I go over all the edges that I already wired up. I'll show you that on this one. See, I've gone all the way along it, and this is it. After I go over it with the modeling foam, I actually have to seal it again with, this is a rubberized paint that seals it in, because this modeling foam, if you don't seal it from both sides, which is what the Fabri-tac was for, is sensitive to water. It can get kind of slimy. It doesn't, I guess if you soaked it, it might fully dissolve, but it just kind of gets a gross texture. So you got to seal that in. Just like you would if you were doing a cosplay prop, you've got to seal in your foam clay. And then once that's sealed in, then you can go on to furring. And then, got the fleece on the lips over, she's got the same wire in here. Now she was done first, so these are a little prettier on the inside, really. She's a little rough as I figured it out. Not bad, of course, but just not as, more hard for me. Okay, you know what? Let's just take these ears off, which these ears come off. They're magnetic. The magnets are one of the heaviest parts of this, honestly. She's so light. So she has hinges, which are made of the same stuff. See if I can get a good shot of that. Normal hinge, but it has a nice flex to it. So you don't have to worry about your hinges breaking. I've broken so many hinges dropping a resin head. These you could bonk around. They're not gonna snap on you. The worst that happens is the wire gets bent and you just bend it back into place, which doesn't happen too much because the foam really keeps it wants to bounce back into its shape. Between the foam and the wire. So you can see, let's see if I get light. You can see right there, that's actually a different clay. It's not even really a clay, it's an epoxy, but it's an ultra light epoxy. It's called Freeform Air by Smooth On, which is a 2-part epoxy, and you got to wear gloves with this stuff. You know, like any epoxy, but Magisculpt's a little more forgiving, but this stuff, you do not want this on your skin. Once it's cured, it's safe, but before it's cured, it's an epoxy, and it's got tiny micro beads that can really irritate your skin if you get that directly on your skin. So you've got to wear gloves. Once it's cured, it's perfectly safe. It's like a plastic almost. And that I put at the bridge of the nose to keep it from drooping, because that's just a little too much weight for the wires to handle. So you can see it on this one. Just a little bit on the bridge and a little bit across the bridge. And now you don't want too much, because the other great thing about Fosshape is it's super breathable. It's like felt. You can get airflow through it, and it's super thin. So it dries out really fast. It's, at least according to their website, it's mold resistant, water resistant. Again, you don't want to get acetone on this either. I don't know why you would be using acetone, but acetone at least temporarily breaks it down. It seems to pop back into this hardened state if you leave it, but, you know, don't get nail polish remover. Don't try and use things like that on your suits. Shouldn't be doing that on normal suits either. It will melt your fur. And since these are a heat form material, you wouldn't want to leave these in a hot place under weight. You can leave them in your car as long as it's not being squished. I leave these in this workspace, which is a hot garage, and obviously I left them in here all day. They're totally fine. But if you put something heavy on it and leave it somewhere hot, it could get warped. Now you could warp it back into place, but that's harder to do after it's furred. You would do that with a steamer, which, if you're careful with it, doesn't damage the fur. That's how I get it nice and sleek. But if you just hold it in place, you're going to melt your fur. You got to be gentle, and you can smooth any warping back. So that's not a big deal if it does get a little warped, but just to be safe, don't be stacking things on top of these. You probably shouldn't be doing that with a normal suit either. You can warp things. But, you know, don't leave these squished under things, and they're totally fine. They're not more sensitive. I've done a car, one of the first things I tested was leaving them in a car, because that's the worry. It's like, oh, you know, you're going to a convention and you step out for lunch and you don't want to come back to, you know, a melted head. That's not going to happen. They're not just going to melt. They would just, if anything, harden a little bit more if they weren't fully hardened, but I make sure they're pretty thoroughly set. But that's, you know, all these supports just are there to make it, you know, less floppy, because this is what it's like right out of. So since it is so squishy, it means these things can take a beating. You don't have to worry about that. So I rambled a little bit, but, you know, I wanted to go over what I knew, what was my worry when I first tried this stuff was, you know, what happens if you re-expose it to heat, you know. Really any heat that would damage a normal fursuit would obviously damage these. They are, you know, they're just as sensitive as that, but I don't think much more. So I think that's everything I wanted to go over. This will be for both this head and future heads. We'll use similar products. If I make any changes, I'll either update this or change the description to my updated product list. All right. thank you for listening to me ramble on about this. Let me know if you have any questions.